My pleasure. Welcome, everybody. So, tonight we're having our third Echoes and Visions reading event of the semester with Julian Zabalbeascoa. I know the Basque last names, like if you've seen my second last name, they're quite difficult to say. He's a Spanish Civil War writer. He's written many different short stories and poems, but his most recent novel, What We Tried to Bury Grows Here, is just an incredible story of the Basque experience during the Civil War in Spain. So I'm glad everyone is here, and I will turn it over to Julian.
Hey, thank you so much. You knocked the last name out of the park. Not the most common occurrence when I do these sorts of things. Thank you so much for this invitation. Thank you so much to the faculty administration for giving me this opportunity. For everyone else who's attending, thank you for your time and a sliver of your evening. Um, so yeah, if you were here before, and David and I were swapping stories. Like him, my family comes from the Basque Country. Uh, Mine's the next province over. Well, actually, I guess two. My dad comes from Biscaya, which I'll be talking about in just a second, and then my mom's family comes from Iparralde, from the French Basque country. And the Basque Country, if you need any sort of primer, exists. There's four provinces in Spain, three in France. They straddle the Pyrenees mountain range. Existed, before there was a Spain, before there was a France. They're pre-Indo-European, as is their tongue. Unlike everyone else in the Iberian Peninsula, they were not Romanized, despite the fact that they were, in the way in El Camino from continental Europe, well, still continental Europe, but into the Iberian Peninsula. So I'm going to be speaking, I suppose, just about why I wrote what I wrote. This novel here, What We Tried to Bury Grows Here, um, and I guess how I wrote it in some regards. Uh, Inflict a reading upon all of you, and then the part that I'm most excited about is the questions that you may have, as I love the conversations I get to have with audiences. Um, so I guess, first up, we're talking about our ancestral lands. And my family is David and I were, and my family is from just north of Guernica. My um, uh, cousins, growing up, I would go to the Basque Country from time to time. Like I said, my father immigrated there to work as a shepherd in California, same as my mom's dad. And so we would go and visit family because I have very little family in the United States. Pretty much everybody is in the Basque Country, save for my mom, dad, my brothers, my grandmother who lived to 101, and then a distant cousin. And that's, well, not so distant, like a third cousin. And then that's it. So everyone is over there. So we would go over there from time to time. And so, I would, because my cousins lived in Guernica, an aunt and uncle, it is where we would go to do our shopping. I was well aware, and I don't know when I became aware of it, of the bombing of the Basque village. As you likely know, Guernica was the site of the first carpet bombing of its kind in human history. In fact, we're coming up on the anniversary once again. Um, it was meant to be a birthday present to Hitler. It was postponed a week because of bad weather, or just not ideal conditions for the German bombers and Italian Air Force that essentially razed the village to the ground and put on display, I guess, the ultimate conclusion of fascism. There was a bit of a debate um, amongst all those on the sidelines, of which there were many. Let's not get involved in the Spanish Civil War because it's a fight against, of communists against fascists, and frankly, we hope that they both lose. Um, but here, a civilian population is targeted. Here, a civilian population with absolutely no military objective that could be gained from it is wiped off the face of the earth, and it shocks the world, the global consciousness. It inspires a report in Le Humanité, the French newspaper, of a French translation of J. Allen's, no, no, I'm sorry, G.L. Sears' report from Guernica, reaches Picasso, and this is what inspires him to paint, arguably the greatest work of the 20th century, his Guernica. And so, returning to it, I don't know when I was aware of the bombing of this village that so much of my family calls home. It's not like my parents sent me down on their knee, and began telling it to me as a child, but I was just kind of always aware of it. And I suppose, what it gets you to do, um, gets a young person to do, or just really anybody perhaps, is ask certain questions. And so for me, the questions were, what would lead somebody, or what would cause somebody to leave their home to go off and destroy somebody else's? And on the other side of that, what is it like to be under such a bombardment while the rest of the world ignores you? So this was, these sorts of questions are kind of at the heart of my novel. It is, there. I should maybe explain the novel just a little bit. It takes place during the Spanish Civil War. It follows two principal characters. Isidro, a young Basque soldier who comes from, where my family's from, in Biscaya, and he joins the fight to preserve democracy in Spain, and to fight for his home, um, because he's made aware very early in his life that ours is a fleeting existence, and while he wants to do something grand with it. He wants to make some positive contribution in the world. And this gains a sort of political focus through the writings of Erlea, Mariana, who's the second principal character. She is a widowed mother of two young children. She lives in Bilbao, the province, the capital of Vizcaya, that province. Um, she is a writer of left wing pamphlets, propaganda, essentially. And through her writing, she is trying to wake a sleeping world up to the threat that is fascism, trying to get everyone to join this fight. And so her writing, gives Isidro that sort of a sort of political clarity and focus, and persuades him to join this fight. They will meet, somewhat briefly, but very meaningfully early on in the novel, and then the reality of war forces them apart. We follow both their stories through the war from its beginning, 1936, to its end in 1939. But the slightly unconventional structure for the book is that there are 20 chapters in the book, and there are 20 narrators, and so each narrator is telling his or her story, and Isidro and Mariana, sometimes are there right alongside the narrator. Sometimes they're the narrator, twice. Sometimes they're peripheral, but their story is being told through the stories of others. And those others are sometimes, loyalists to the government, those who are fighting to preserve democracy in Spain. Oftentimes it's civilians, children even, the clergy, and then other times it's nationalists and fascists. And so, that kind of like question at the heart of the bombing of Guernica that's kind of like been with me since the beginning, is kind of what animates this book, right? Trying to understand that from multiple perspectives. Um, so, you know, then I guess there's the issue of research as well. And so it was initially just lived, like my grandma, was pretty much, I think, the exact age as David's. I think she was born in 1920. I think that made her 17 when Guernica was bombed. And like I said, our village is just north of Guernica. It's these are windy mountainous roads, beautiful, gorgeous. I was just there 2 weeks ago. That landscape, like there's something like ancestral. I think in the cellular makeup of me, like I feel most home there. Um, just something about that landscape that you know that makes me feel a bit more complete. So anyway, so I'm just in my mind, I'm imagining that drive now. It's windy, it's mountainous, but it's beautiful. It's a poetic sort of landscape. If you're a German bomber, it's a couple of miles. It's not well, more than two, but it's several miles. Um, so my grandma saw the planes, go overhead to Guernica. She heard the destruction of the village. She's unaware, you know that what was happening. Also, if these planes were going to be coming for her. And then that night she saw the clouds just veined in red from the fire that was burning this village. And so that was one of the first details I had. And the destruction of Guernica was really like one of the few things I had. What I didn't have was the context for it, like what makes Guernica possible, and what are the repercussions of something like this. And so that's where the book comes in. The destruction of the village is the second chapter. Um, the novel moves pretty far, both temporal and geographic from that moment. But that was the beginning. That was my way in. And then, this is a fight for democracy. This is a fight against fascism. If you're a fascist, it's a fight for democracy. I'm sorry, if it's a fight rather for, you know, a new world as you see it, a new world that is meant to look very much like an ideal version of a world you once knew and that has since passed by. Um, and so, so in a way too, like through this novel, I was trying to uh, better understand perhaps, these times in which we're living in. Um, I began the novel in 2012. It took me a very long time to write this book. It is my first novel. I could not have imagined that the Venn diagram would become, almost a perfect circle. Um, but in addition to attempting to understand, this moment, and both I suppose globally, but also nationally, and those we share this time with, it was also early on a sort of approach to understand my great grandfather, my grandmother's father, because as I was working on this book, I asked my aunts. Uh, so who did we have who participated in the war? Thinking like, okay, I'll put their story on the page. Who knows? Maybe they might even become my protagonists. That my Isidro, the guy who we followed through this whole thing. Um, if anything, hopefully it might give me some sort of street cred as I go about, uh, selling this book or attempting to like an agent and then later on a publisher. And my aunt said, "Oh, you know what? No one. Like we had no one participate in the war." And I was, "Are you kidding me? We've like this is a civil war. All of society was more or less pulled in, and my village in Biscaya is only one of three villages that was never bombed. Like that's how little happened in my village. Every other village around us bombed. There's only three in the province, and ours is one of them. You have the sense like nothing happens there." Uh, so he said, "Yeah, no one fought. But but our grandfather, your great grandfather, he was a big Franco supporter, and Franco was the main insurrectionist. He's the one who would become dictator of Spain. fascist adjacent, um, authoritarian, etc. Not a good guy. Uh, but it turns out my great grandfather was a big supporter of him, and so initially it was fairly easy for me to pigeonhole this guy. Um, my politics do not align with his, uh, and and so and it's an unfortunate thing, but like you know if we're going to be remembered, 3 or 4 generations down the line, before we slide into oblivion, we're going to be reduced to a few anecdotes. So I'm sure he was as complex of a person um, as I hope that I am, and everybody else. And yet, I saw him basically, as a sort of antagonist to my own worldview and sense of how society should be structured, and to what aim government should seek to serve. Um, but working on the novel, I began to to truck in a different approach. Because, like I said, I began, there are chapters in here from the points of view of fascists, of nationalists, of those who are opposed to democracy. And if I would have put them on the page just to beat them up, there would have been no sport in it. It wouldn't have been very interesting if, like at I would the best I could hope for is that I would have written like propaganda, because at least propaganda can move somebody. But I most certainly would not have written anything, neighborly or cousinly to literature. And so if I was going to write these characters, I had to get out of the way and I had to write their truth. There's this quote from the French filmmaker Jean Renoir from The Rules of the Game. And he says that the horrible thing about life is that everybody has a reason. And so, as a fiction writer, what you're attempting to do is try to find your character's reasons. And, by doing that, I began to, better appreciate my great grandfather and his sense of a changing world. Like I still think he's completely wrong. I mean, history has proven as much. Franco was a terrible leader, um, ruthless. His aspiration to become leader and then his leadership resulted in unimaginable loss, like or incomprehensible. Um, so but but that's not necessarily the point. We find ourselves now as we once were in the age of demagoguery, where we are supposed to look at those who hold a different opinion than us as someone who should be crushed in one way or another. Not saying like physically or with their lives, but silenced, let's just say. Uh, and that is pretty antithetical to democracy. That's pretty antithetical to this experiment that we're all part of. Democracy is, I think, a conversation that we're having with each other. What the demagogues want is if we're going to be, engaging with one another, it should just to go at each other's throats. That kind of entrenches them, in power. Uh, make sure that wealth gets hoovered up, uh, and make sure that nothing, that there's no real positive change. We are, in the end, I think, our own salvation. And so, this is what the book is is attempting, and this is what I was attempting. I realized only after the fact with the book, because this is I'm not sure what the other writers have said who have been on here, But and I know there's some writers who are like this, but we're making it up as we go along. Just like this life. We are existing in the realm of mystery, of uncertainty. Um, I'm not, and I can't remember who said this, but I'm paraphrasing now. I'm I don't sit down at the desk because I have something to say, but instead because I have something to hopefully discover. And so, to that, maybe like how I wrote this book, like the process for it. So this is, my debut novel, and like I said, I was at it for, I don't know, like 11 years, 12 years, quite some time. Um, and in part because this is and is not the first book that I wrote. So I did grad school. I was super fortunate. I did grad school in Madrid, um, through the University of New Orleans, and I got to do 5 summers there. It was a low risk program, and these exist, and I strongly encourage you to pursue them if life doesn't allow you to dedicate 3 uninterrupted years to pursuing an MFA, because this allows you to take a class here, take a class there, like time wise, while you have a job, look after people, whatever it might be, attend to the other responsibilities in your life. And so I ended up doing this low res program. There was like an online component, but I did very few online courses because, the summers I could be in Madrid for a month. Um, Temperature, like weather wise, horrible time to be in Madrid. July, like it's the heat is just a hot blanket on top of you. The air doesn't move. Um, I was young and not flush with any sort of money. So I don't even think I bought like a fan, which would have set me back like $20 because that would have been too much of an investment. I was only going to be there for a month. So it's that sort of living. Um, but it was incredible. Uh, I met my wife there, met some of my great friends there. Still really good friends. Just texting the other day with my professor and mentor there. He officiated our wedding. And so all that's to say, amazing, amazing time, amazing program, amazing experience. The one problem with it is that I left grad school with like very little to show for my time there, so far as like, um, you know, pages worthy of showing to the world. And it's because in grad school I changed the way that I wrote. Um, I was convinced, for whatever reason, that I needed to know exactly what I was going to be saying before, like I needed Hitchcockian storyboards for the entire novel before I sat down to write a single word. I needed the whole thing figured out. It needed to be brilliant. It had to be like, I don't know why, like some sort of manifesto. I was in my early 20s. I had a lot of important things to tell the world, and for whatever reason, I thought fiction would be the venue by which I would share my genius with with my fellow human beings. And everything I wrote was DOA. Everything I wrote uh, was pretty worthless. I never got past chapter 3, because I wasn't interested in it. For starters, it was lifeless. And so it wasn't until I left grad school, with an MFA, somehow, um, and and then sat down, to write one day because I saw a character in my head and I didn't know where he was going, what his story was, anything like that. And at the end of the writing session, I had a full story, and that would end up becoming my first published story. Zone 3 was a magazine, now that I think about it. And and this kind of changed my approach. Um, what got me into writing and what likely got, those writers here into writing is, that dreaming, creative, spontaneous, impulse within us, that might even be like sort of salvation in some regards. Like for me, as I said, my dad immigrated to the U.S. to be a shepherd, and that was my childhood, working on the ranch with sheep. And I work at a university now. I'm over at University of Massachusetts Lowell, in the honors college there. I am not a rancher then, and I as a child I hated it. So I couldn't stand being out there. Now I can appreciate it in some regards. Um, but who knows what the home situations were like for my fellow classmates. But for me, I felt like I was the only one in the class who was so excited that winter break was over. Because since winter break was over, it meant that I could finally sleep in. I only had to get up at 7 o'clock or 6:30, whatever it was, to go to school. Because during winter break, my dad would have us out there at 4 o'clock in the morning, and then we wouldn't get home until 8 o'clock at night or something. And so what was the remedy to being out there is to dream myself away from it, to dream myself elsewhere, to imagine that the shepherd staff that I held was a lightsaber, and that I was off on some intergalactic adventure. Um, this is where the stories, came from. This is why I love storytelling, because of that spontaneous creative spark. It wasn't um, a sort of you know it wasn't like a problem solving kind of thing. It wasn't methodical. It was dreaming. And so what I ended up realizing that I needed to do was to dream on the page. And so then this became my approach to and this is my approach. This is how I write. I'm intuitive. I've like this novel is and I hope it doesn't scare anybody off, but it is a sort of complex structure, let's say. There's a lot of moving parts in here. It's not all that long, but there's and then there's a lot of, I hope, Easter eggs hidden throughout too. I did not write one line of an outline. Like there's no outline exists for this except what's in my head here. It is I approach it intuitively. Um, I every single chapter in here, I had no idea where it was going. I would see an image, I would hear a voice, um, and that's it. That's all I need to get going. But I would never plot anything out. I'd never write anything out. I would end the day not entirely aware of where I'd begin tomorrow. So so that was my process and was not. Because as I began compiling these chapters, I again felt I had something very important to say. And so the first novel that I wrote was Is This and Is Not This? And it is uh, it really is like the great Basque American novel that the world did not know that it needed, and still does not desire because I couldn't sell it. But it had two timelines. It had this Spanish Civil War timeline, which is in here, just a part of it though back then, and it had a contemporary timeline, which is following Isidro's children and his grandchildren while they deal with his legacy of his time in the Spanish Civil War. Um, ETA is in there. Dave and I were speaking about the Basque terrorist group earlier. The Basque diaspora in the United States was there. I thought it was a really smart book, but uh, none of my friends were reading it quickly. My writer friends I would give it to, and I sent it out to agents, and I got a lot of. I was really really fortunate because a lot of agents said that they wanted to take a look at it, because a number of these chapters have been published as short stories, in really well respected journals, literary magazines, which is really like the backbone for the American literary landscape. Um, but none of those eight, like I got ghosted by basically all of them. Like a few wrote back to me, but most didn't even bother. And so working on this novel, I realized like I got in my way. Well, it took me a long time. Like we're talking like 10 years into this process, for that like light bulb moment. Like I got in my own way again. I did what I was doing in grad school. I thought I had something important to say, and rather than write to discover a story, I was writing to tell a story. Um, and and so I, what I did was I was reading. I'm not sure where her book is, but Secondhand Time by Svetlana Alexievich. She won the Nobel Prize in Literature 2014, 2015, right around then. She's Belarusian, and what makes her slightly unique for this prize is that she writes oral histories, um, and it's just voices. It is all of these voices that create like this sort of quilt to tell the story of Russia, the Soviet Union, all that kind of stuff through time. Uh, Highest recommendation. She's an incredible writer. And so reading that, I thought, oh, I didn't realize that it was a possibility. I didn't realize he could write a story like that. And so it gave me a sort of permission to go all in on the Spanish Civil War stories, because I felt, in my bones, in my guts, somewhere, um, that really I should have written a novel about the Spanish Civil War, just all these voices from the war. Of course, I never read a book like that, so I didn't think that I could. And so I told my wife, I said, I'm thinking about scrapping the contemporary timeline and just focusing on the Spanish Civil War. And she says, don't, like, you're panicking. The book's out still with a lot of agents. Give it time. And I said, no, like I know I've done it again. I know I got in my own way. And the other thing like that convinced me of that is that, while I was working on the Spanish Civil War chapters, they were really effortless. They came out, as a sort of uh, they came out easily. I was carried away by the voice, carried away by the images. The narrators were showing me the way. Whereas for the contemporary chapters, it was pulling teeth. Oh my God, like the months each chapter took me. If the Spanish Civil War chapters, like I'm Beethoven at the keys, just high fiving people at the cafe. For the contemporary chapters, it's just like click, click, click. I was it hurt. Granted, I learned a lot during the process. Like nothing is wasted. You're putting your hours into your craft. So I'm a better writer because of it. But oh God, how they hurt. So I realized it was because the Spanish Civil War chapters I was dreaming on the page, and like I said, I had things to say. In those contemporary chapters, I was trying to say them, and that's not the kind of writer that I am. I have learned. Um, so so the issue was that uh my wife was pregnant. um that first effort took me like 10 years. uh you know Very soon our son would be born, and I would not have much of the day anymore to call my own. But one of my grandmothers had just turned, maybe it was 98, 99, and the other one was just like 2 years behind her, 95, 96, 97, something like that. So maybe I would be given a long tenure on this spin and blue dot. So what was another 10 years then? And it was a story that I felt I was supposed to tell. It turns out that it was a story I was supposed to tell because it came out, you know, really effortlessly. This is now going to seem like a humble brag, so I hope that it isn't, but just kind of uh, points you, for those of you who are writers, to to take that sort of leap yourselves, because the first chapter I wrote, convinced, like, okay, I'm gonna tell a novel about Spanish Civil War, and I'm just gonna load it with voices. Like I wrote that one in 4 days, and it was effortless and it was fun. The voice was right there, and I felt myself once again in command. And I was like, well, okay, I'm back. And then the next uh, narrator was there, and she was telling me her story. And that first one was like the darkest one I would consider in the book, and the next one's the longest one. But within like 6 days, I'd had it written, and so I'm like, whoa, 2 chapters in 2 weeks. Like, who gets to go through the world saying that? Um, and consider myself, lucky, and now here comes the slog. But instead, as I was, you know, putting the final touches on that one, up steps the next narrator. And then that narrator, like as they're finishing their story, I can fill the next one, and she's waiting for her turn at the mic. And so, you know, in the course of 8 weeks, I wrote the entire, the rest of the novel. It all came out in a gush. And then, then there was like the issue of revising and stuff like that. But I was on the right path, I felt. I'd even send it out to like send some stuff out to literary magazines, and they'd get immediately accepted. And so just to kind of put a bow on that, it was when we were in the maternity ward, it was my son's second day of life. And I get an email from an agent saying that he read the manuscript, he loved it, and he would love to represent it. And so, it's like, yep, like that was the right move, to honor that dreaming sense, to pursue, the uncertainty, to not allow, like market forces to determine what I'm going to write, because the world necessarily wasn't clamoring for this sort of structure for a novel about the Spanish Civil War, and just to kind of honor that feeling within me. And then then I'm incredibly lucky that it would find, that I'd get an agent, and then that I'd find a publisher, and that the novel would then find readers. And there was still work to be done after the fact. Like I ended up writing 4 more chapters after I got the agent. But anyways, but just to say, like, that intuitive voice, that voice that is within you, that voice that is encouraging you towards this art form. Um, don't you know don't let your waking sober self interfere with it, and certainly don't let uh, um, the market prospects of the American literary landscape, which is dominated by the big five publishing, interfere with that either. So I'm trying to think, how are we with time? Am I hitting the marks?
Yeah, you're
And
good. Yeah, you're good on time for sure.
Okay, and then should I do a reading? I would much I love the Q&A. I love a
Right.
conversation, but should I do a reading?
Yeah, if you could do at least just one little excerpt to give us an idea of you've talked about the process, so let's
Yeah.
see it come to life in in one of the parts and whichever
Okay.
section.
Yeah, I'm
You
trying.
know.
I picked out a spot thinking I'm going to read a full chapter, I've got time. And then I really should know because I don't know about the other professors in this course, or I'm sorry, who are here attending this. And thank you so much for your patience, and for listening here. But I'm gifted with a long wind. Um, I could I could go on for quite some time, and so I should have been aware of that. But so I'm gonna start reading from this chapter, and then I'm going to try to find a place to stop. And I don't know where that's going to be, because it's certainly not going to be at the end, because one, two, three, because it's like 8 or 9 pages, and like I said, I would very much love to have a conversation with all of you. So this is chapter 10. We're halfway through it, and this is so he begins. When I came upon the fascist, he was sitting on a log and seemed at peace. Surprisingly, I didn't hate him for this. In fact, since deciding to go through with it, I'd been buoyed by euphoria I hoped would remain beyond this day, which I intended to be my last. The fascist was smoking a cigarette or thumbing some pebbles or reciting poetry to the shrubs. I couldn't tell, as his back was to me, and I had time to decide where to place my crosshairs, choosing to shoot the log directly beneath him. If I missed, the bullet would rip into his ass, but I didn't miss, and he jumped, his arms flailing as he fell forward to run. My thinking had been that after passing on this blissful lightness to him, thereby guaranteeing preservation, I sick my rifle butt on the ground and lean over it, pressing the muzzle to the spot between my throat and bottom of my chin. Lately, the headaches had become even more unbearable. Same with the incessant high-pitched frequency in my ears I couldn't escape, and the burden and tension of survival. The headaches had begun after the shelling at Siguenza that had claimed so many of our men. I had thought, what luck to be so close to death, yet to have survived. That night, I was on my hands and knees for the pain. I felt my head would burst from the pressure inside. I started seeing our dead, doing mundane tasks, relacing their boots, picking something from their teeth. But always I'd receive a sidelong glance from them. It was a confident, knowing look. I'd suffer in ways I couldn't yet conceive. Even before the war, I'd come to a ledge, and a dark voice within me would whisper, "John." Not long after the shelling, that voice interrupted most every thought. We are each issued a role in this life. I became convinced there was only one relief for mine, but I couldn't do it with the fascists falling every 10 meters, making negligible distance between us. Unfortunately, the others, my brothers in arms, roused by my rifle shot, rushed to me and took aim. Watching the fascists' desperate and frantic efforts, I understood it was not solely this euphoria he strove to carry forward, but that I had given him his life back, and he was now attempting the same for me. If I get away, his pitiable triad flight told me, you can't put the muzzle under your chin. Come on, I was surprised to hear myself saying, and faster. Our bullets started for him, but as I said, he couldn't go a few meters without tripping, which was likely what kept saving him. Several times he'd tumble in tandem with rifle shot, and I think with neither sadness nor relief, so that's it, the two of us are done for. At which point he'd crawl forward, each limb out of concert with the other, stumble to get himself upright, and soon skid onto his face once more. Maybe a piece of the log had penetrated his leg. Nothing else explained his difficulty in staying on his feet. I suppose it would have been easier for one of us to run after him and dig a knife into his back, but who is to guess he'd continue falling as often as he did? I began thinking the others were missing on purpose so as to prolong this comedy all the way to the horizon if possible. If that was the case, he and I had more in common than I could have imagined. Somebody, something, found humor in delaying our end. Robles bumped me as he went to a knee. He pressed a rifle butt snug to his shoulder, and I saw that this one was it. The line was direct. A tight thread knotted straight from his rifle to the fascists. I held my breath. I waited. But Robles paused and cocked his head slightly to steady me in his periphery. He was working the whole thing out. That was my life, too, in the round eyesight of his stock's end. He still had time to ease his finger against the trigger. Nothing had happened to that line. But he lowered his rifle and looked at me directly and nodded, his lips screwing to the left side of his face, an expression that said, Vale, let's see. Sure, maybe he was a murderer of children, but who knows? He might be the one to save us all. Let's see. I nodded too, then I laughed, realizing how foolish I'd been, how I'd been looking at the world through a pinhole these previous weeks. The sky was a muddy sort of still, the color of water off our hands whenever we found the rare fountain. A few more shots went after the fascist. The bullets wouldn't have been able to do much from this distance. It was like scaring off a wolf. So he got away. And what can I say? I could have drunk the sky. Robles was still nodding, his lips turned down, his thoughts finding my ears. Let's see, he kept saying. Let's see. And I wish it had lasted, this let's see. The not knowing how the war would go, the chance it might, finally, turn in our favor. Hours later, the fascists surprised us, starting their offensive. They were a black, twisting cloud of starlings while they shelled us. The only faces I can recall within that deafening intensity were those the shrapnel tore apart. The resigned look in their eyes the moment before it happened. A look that told me they'd always known this would be their end, that none of this came as a surprise, regardless of how they tensed when shrapnel met flesh. It explained why I was among the few taken prisoner. A ridiculous confidence possessed me. I was not allowed to die. Don't worry, I whispered to my four fellow prisoners. We won't be executed, but instead put to work, chained to each other, toiling on some project meant to bring forward the fascist stillborn vision. I was playing my role, and this made the next few days of sleeplessness and starvation a bearable existence or experience. I knew how the rest would go, and there was some comfort in that. A diminishing supply, as it so happened. Soon the headaches returned, and the world was once more reduced to that ceaseless, jaw clenching high frequency, a ringing that needled the back of my teeth and the refuse to take a breath. I wanted out. Thankfully, orders arrived for our captors to move. Wait, yeah, for our captors to move camp. A 2-day journey to Valladolid. We prisoners wouldn't be joining them. Unlike the four others, this came as a relief to me. I was wrong, I told them, perhaps too giddily. There is no prearranged story. We're in nobody's hands. But no, we were dropped off at a prison, which was in fact an old monastery in a cleared square of a grove outside Burgos. If not for all the lorries and the bored soldiers smoking dispassionately, you wouldn't have guessed it was a prison. From the outside, that is. There wasn't any fooling yourself after being shoved in. The smell was, at its most basic, festering human filth not even a breeze would touch. Underpinning it was despair, despair at being incapable of foreselling the world's end. Life had stopped for those locked inside. So miserable was it in there, the ghosts stayed away. So that's not a very hopeful place to end. And I was thinking I would read this chapter because of I feel like it's hope. So I'm just gonna skip a part here, and he ends up uh, finding an empty room, and his idea is that he's gonna jump. It's his first opportunity, his first time that he's alone, and and he's gonna meet someone there. And the someone he's gonna meet is Isidro, is our protagonist, the soldier we're following through the entirety of this novel. Um, and I realize now I have to do like dialogue and act it out, and I'm not all the best with that. So my apologies to everyone, but here we go. I stepped further into the room to the window, and even the cold air that gusted in when I opened it couldn't tense my muscles. I was at peace. Below, blinding sunlight flared off the hard packed snow. I'd have to dive headfirst to ensure I didn't emerge from the effort a cripple. As if to prod me, the ringing in my ears intensified. Yet beyond it, I heard the shifting of floorboards. A prisoner had been sitting in the corner all this while. He was perhaps a year or two younger than me. Judging by the length of his filthy beard, he'd been in here at least 3 months more than I had. I wondered if he wasn't trying to gather the courage to go through with it himself, but he told me, "You can't give that to them." His voice was flat. "To who? The guards? Have they installed you here?" He appeared to consider this, then shook his head, the slightest emotions. "I happened in on my own, like you." It was God then. His was a pitying smile. "I don't think so. Whoever it was, I'm not giving them anything but taking it, taking my life back, my control of it." "By throwing it out the window," he said. "You went to the same school as the fascists, did you? They're saving Spain by massacring us all." His words plumed in the cold. "You don't understand." He brought a hand up to scratch his chin. He was missing two of his middle fingers. The nubs moved fruitlessly over his skin. "This place," he said, "of the prison. Wild thoughts find me here too." I focused on his maimed hand, the two uneven nubs. I wondered what else he'd lost. I felt as though I'd happened upon a hermit in the woods, social isolation having pulped his mind. "Thoughts about my ancestors," he continued. "People I never met, yet I know they existed because I'm here." In a kinder world, he'd have his room and I'd have mine, and neither of us would get in the other's way. "If you don't mind," I said, "I'd like to be alone now." He ignored me. And I keep returning to this. I have a duty to them, a duty to persist, to resist. You've heard the fascists, their chants, "Viva la muerte." So long as the choice remains ours, we have to choose life. I tapped the windowsill and glanced out it, squinting for the light I was convinced would silence the ringing and end the headaches. "And if I don't want to?" "There's a guard in here," he said, "who's feeding me news from the outside. We've taken Teruel. Teruel!" Not once had I thought of the city, was only vaguely aware of its placement on the map, but for the prisoners' excitement, someone could be forgiven for thinking we'd been fighting the year and a half for Teruel. "We're driving them back. Finally, the world can't ignore us now. They'll come rushing to our defense." "This is a story I no longer care about," I said. "Interesting," he said. "You believe we have a choice." I said, placing all the emphasis on the word I could do. "If you feel that way," he looked past me at the window. It was like being asked to make love in front of a crowd. I motioned to the door. He nodded and stood, grimacing as he stretched. There's a fight ahead of us yet, he said when he straightened. I turned my hands up. For what? Meaning, it's all pointless in the end. You know, he said, I feel for them, my ancestors. All their struggles, yet I'm the one who gets to be here to fight these bastards for the future of the world. And you do too. I had to give it to him. The conditions of the prison were such that they rid you of every noble and high minded thought. Difficult to think augustly while your gut sees, and the very stenches were like the foulest pair of fingers being shoved down your throat. I'm tired of fighting, I said. Who couldn't go for a little rest? But that's not the world we find ourselves in. We now stood face to face. There was an alertness and sharpness in his eyes that got me wondering if I wasn't actually the mad one. You don't understand what this is like, I tried again, not even convincing myself this time. Of course I do. He might as well have pinched my cheek affectionately and patted it. But I'm not letting it keep me from showing those fascists. He turned to the door saying, You and me and our friends, blood is pumping through us still. Just you watch how we'll put it to use. He was now down the hallway. I was certain that if I jumped, he'd be standing in the snow with arms cradled to receive me. Then I'd really be in trouble. This floor had once been an attic, so you had to crouch to keep your head from scraping against the low ceiling. That and the tight passage of the hallway brought his voice to me. You'll want to stay alive to see that. I plan to. And that's the end of that chapter. Thank you for your patience there in sticking through that. Um, so yeah, so I wanted to like why that particular chapter just really quickly. Again, like this isn't like I wasn't writing for like a uh, um, I'm not trying to solve a problem, but really, in pursuit of mystery. I was laying in bed and I saw that first image, a soldier, able to train his rifle on a fascist back. And that's all I had. And I had no idea who these characters were, what they were doing, what would happen afterwards. But I just had that image, and it wouldn't leave me alone. I remember I had a cold. It was, you know, this was at times of COVID, and so it was like my first time being sick in like a year and a half after having had COVID. Um, and and so I just taken NyQuil, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna keep that here. I'll get to it in the morning because I tend to write in the morning, and the image just wouldn't leave me. So I'm like, oh, okay, fine. So I got up and I typed the first little bit down, and then I kind of got carried away. And then the next morning, I forget what I was doing, something. And at night, once again, took the NyQuil, and really, like, I should be like a poster child for NyQuil, as like the elixir of the muses, because then I saw like the next part of the story, and so toss off the blankets, went to the desk and writing until I can't see straight. And then the third night I should have guessed, but of course the same thing happened. So the whole thing came out in 3 days. And it wasn't until long, long, long after I wrote it that I realized like what I had written. Speaking of COVID, so my wife and I were in Madrid when the whole world went sideways. We were there in March 2020. After obviously China, but then Italy. Madrid was the next ground zero, and so we got COVID there. And we came back. We were among the first like 50, 60 people here in the state of Massachusetts to test positive for COVID. Um, and we were dealing with that. And of course, like it was scary times. You didn't know who was going to who it was really going to hit, hard. Um, and for my wife, it did, for a while. She was really sick for 21 days. And I kind of skirted out of it until like all my symptoms cleared and I was able to leave the apartment after quarantine, because no one knew what long COVID was at the time, but I got hit by it, and a lot of weird, super super weird symptoms, that I won't go into now. But I could spend like another 45 minutes just talking about those. Um, but but so the story is about that. I think it's about who does this thing hit, and who does it hit really hard, and how and why is it that you get to consider yourself among the survivors. um And so so it's like grappling with that mystery. But again, like I was never attempting to say something, but instead, attempting to discover it. And then in the end, it is that sort of that binary, perhaps, or that that is established here before us. You know, give up, submit, uh, allow those up top to create the future, or count ourselves lucky that we get to be here, that we're the ones that get to put our shoulder against it, and attempt to bring forward the sort of future and world that we want. And so so we've got that here too, right? If you survive, like what is it for? Hopefully to make the world a little bit better for everybody else. So that's it. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening this entire time. Please, your questions. I can't wait to have a conversation with all of you now.
Yeah. And you can either unmute or put them in the chat.
Anything at all, even like food recommendations for San Sebastian. Because I get so where David's family's from, I take students there every summer. I lead a lot of study abroad programs for my university. I've got the greatest job in the world, I feel, and so I get to be there for 2 months with students over the summer. And I studied abroad in Donosti when I was my entire junior year, August to August, long ago. Um, so yeah, so anything. Let's have at it. Yes, Sally.
Sure. Thank you so much for sharing both. I didn't have a chance to read, so I actually ordered it on Amazon while you were talking. I think it
Oh,
comes
nice.
next
Thank
week.
you.
It comes next week. Um, but I was just listening to your description, and it sounds like a really neat attempt to kind of take it from a bunch of different perspectives, the horror that did happen in the small town of Guernica in those times. But at the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned that you were really interested in the question of how society, and I think you said should be, but could be structured. And I was
Mm.
kind of curious that after, as you were writing it, maybe you don't have like a one-all system of everything that would, solve it all, or maybe you do.
Oh
But
boy,
what
where's my
was
soapbox? Yeah.
what would be one of the biggest takeaways you took from actually trying to imagine these different perspectives and what was going on and how everyone felt? What was one of the biggest things you took away?
Yeah, I mean, the Spanish Civil War was very much like ours, like at the time which we find ourselves in, which is when, the government was the democracy, the republic was in its nascency. 1931, the Second Republic in Spain comes forward. 1936, there is this coup attempt that results in a 3-year civil war that, kills up to a million, displaces up to a million more. Um, and at its heart, what it was about, well, I mean, it's a lot. But one of the ways I see it in the book is you have a government that is attempting to be far more inclusive, to make life better for the masses, uh, that is going to, reorder the power structure, to bring it much more, to the sort of stature of regular citizens, and take power away from those sorts of institutions that have long held it, for coming up, I guess, a half a century in Spain, the church, the military, um, the elite being like owners of industry, and it depended upon where you were in Spain, but the landowners as well. And because like it depends, like if you're in the north, they have a much more democratic, and long had, like John Adams went to the Basque Country, and was floored by what he saw as, the founders are putting together their vision for America. But down in the south, it's feudal, right? They've got the caciques. It's that they're living in a different century. And so, it is about taking power from those who had long held it, who impoverished the lives of the majority of the people in the country, and hoping to improve the lives, the potential, give suffrage to women, uh, and give everyone, I guess, a fair shot at their one glimpse at this life. Of course, that threatens those in power, and they would that as we find it today, like they're not good. They don't want to give that up. And we see it in a number of campaigns here in the United States. Like they'll do all they can to be sure that their hold on society and the trajectory of wealth just going all up to the top, that they're able to maintain that. And so so this is what it was a fight for. And they were also reactionaries, right? Like they're trying to bring back a glorious vision of a country that never really existed. But trying to bring back their vision of it against those who are determined to bring forward a more just, more inclusive uh, sort of world. And that is the fight then, and now, of course.
Some any other questions? My one is real quick. Do you
Yeah.
plan to have the novel translated into
Oh
Basque
well,
or
like,
Spanish?
wait a minute. Are you offering?
I could do the Spanish.
I
The
hear that. I hear
Basque would be
yes.
very hard. I think.
Uh, yeah. No, I mean, it's these things are out of your hands. With anything in publishing. Like for all of you writers out there, uh, it is it's a long road. It is a road filled with rejection, uh, but that's all right. Like life is filled with rejection. There are lessons to be taken from it. Like if my great the great Basque American novel that no one knew they wanted, if some agent would have accepted that and shopped it around, and ultimately it wouldn't have come to anything because it probably shouldn't have seen the light of day. This book would have never been written. But those sorts of the setbacks that I had there, I was able to take something from them. That was like that's one of the big things I learned from grad school is how to develop a thick skin. Um, you sit in your cone of silence and you could, which I'm sure I did initially, you could have that perspective like, well, they don't get it. Like they're not as much of a genius as me, and they're just
Mhm.
incapable of seeing the brilliance that I've put forward. God, I feel sorry for those morons. You could have that point of view, or you can internalize it, and you could think like, okay, life is about life is flux, life is impermanence, life is change, and maybe I'm not the greatest writer that has ever lived at this very moment. But if I want to get closer to that, I probably need to keep growing. I need to keep changing. I need to improve. And everyone here is attempting to help me. Yes, Sally.
I just wanted to say that with regards to being translated into Basque, it might be worth reaching out to translation programs in the Basque country because getting published in Basque is maybe a little bit, if somebody translates you, you have more chances perhaps
Yeah.
than in the US where we have so much competition in this one language.
Mhm.
And the Basque government can be very generous. So it
Oh
might
yeah, they
be,
can
yeah,
be.
and especially if since you have this diaspora history connection that could actually be
Mhm.
very attractive. You might consider it.
Yeah, no, no, I don't. I wish, and I do know. So, and you've done your work on Bernardo Achaga.
Well, and Oribe, great Cameron Oribe.
Oh,
And
nice.
I've
Oh
been
yeah.
translated into Basque. I have one text
Hey,
that technically this same graduate program put in. I wrote it in Spanish, but they translated it into English and Basque for me.
look at that. Now, who's the translator in Basque?
I was just looking for the copy and I don't have it here.
Oh
It's at
yeah.
work.
Yeah, because
But
I've had one chapter two, the one Guernica was translated into Basque, by Bernardo Achaga's wife,
oh,
Asun
that's
Garicano.
amazing.
Yeah, and so I became friends. I see them every single summer. They're incredible people. Um, Asun's retired, but she still does translate. So that would be, if it were to happen, that likely be my way in. But but it's kind of like because she was on a sort of tour of the U.S. because she was doing a book about Basques from maybe California or maybe from America writ large, and and they came to my little town of Los Banos, California. I'm from the Central Valley of California, and because we have a big Basque population, and it was the Basque picnic there, this sort of fiesta. And my mom's like, "Oh, so who are you?" And for everyone else, Hudson Garicano is like the biggest and most celebrated translator of works into Basque. And she's like, "Oh, I'm a writer," and then her husband Bernardo Chaga is the most celebrated of Basque
Mhm.
authors. And so, I'm a writer, blah, blah, and my mom's like, "Oh, my son writes too," which I'm sure she gets, quite a bit. I'm going to introduce you to him. And so, she was very sweet, like, "Okay, yeah." And so my mom, like, "Oh, she's a writer too." But we ended up talking. And then she's like, "Well, send me, something of yours. I'd love to see it." And so I sent them that chapter just to show it to them, or show it to her, without any sort of ambitions, just like, "Oh, show them some of my work." And then, they said that she and Bernardo loved it, and they had a literary journal called Erlea, which is how I got the pen name for my character, Erlea, and asked them if I could use it and explain all the reasons why I wanted to, and offer a sort of homage to their magazine. And they loved it. But they end up publishing it in that, and I soon translated. So that's my one work into Basque, and I can't read a word of it, unfortunately. But that would be the way in were it to happen. I know it's a small but mighty readership. Those
But the
who those
translation community is growing, and it
Yeah.
becomes more and more necessary to have projects to work on. So you're
Mhm.
actually helping someone
I'm
too.
an Yeah, I would love to help them translate my book into Basque. I love to give back in that way. No, no, it would be the greatest honor, like having that one chapter. It's over there. Like it was such an honor. I got to give it to my dad, and give it to my dad, and he's like, "Oh, it's Basque," but because he grew up during the Franco dictatorship, he knows Basque, but you speak in the house behind closed doors, and so he doesn't know how to read it, doesn't know how to write it. Um, just
Well,
it's a it was
it
a
didn't really
forbidden
get
language.
standardized,
Yeah,
as you
yeah.
know, but our group here might not. It didn't get standardized until after Funko, and
Mhm.
even still to this day, what people speak isn't necessarily what you hear on the news
Of
or what you
course,
read
yeah.
in the
Sure.
newspaper. Every town still has. I'm more familiar with Ondarroa, which is
Oh,
where
nice.
Joaquim Oribe is from,
Yeah,
and it's yeah, that Basque
which
is
is a beautiful spot too.
yeah,
And so do you know Kierman?
yeah.
And awesome. Yeah, isn't he? I mean, he's so great.
Hmm.
Um, it's just such like because his book, Bilbao, New York, Bilbao, somewhere there. Reading, I'm just like, oh my god, like a titan. And then I
That's the
got to
one I
meet.
published on. I published on that one.
Oh, did you? Oh, exciting.
Mhm.
But then, I'm sure like you, like, got to meet him, and he's just such a warm, effusive, like he's always laughing.
Yeah.
Um,
Yes, yes.
such and same with like Bernardo Achaga, like they're so, these are two of the titans of Basque literature, and they're so down to earth. They're so
Not just Basque.
friendly.
That's
It
just how I
is.
think
It
of Basque
is.
culture.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it tends to be a pretty classless society, right? Like class doesn't.
As long as you eat.
Yeah.
Yes.
Y- Yeah, I mean, like Donosti has some of those Donostiarras who are just like a little, but everyone has like not
Well,
everyone, but most
don't
people,
say it's different. It's the big city. It's different.
yeah, but most people have like one foot, in the countryside or on a
Yeah.
mountain or
Mhm.
something, so it tends like I love it because you really don't think about class in the way that you do in like most places here in the U.S., but then other places like some of the big cities in Spain. I was just in Barcelona for an event, and I was like, God, oh my, like I couldn't. Wonderful people there, and beautiful city, but just the money that is in Barcelona, it makes me
It's like
feel a
being
little
on Fifth
icky.
Avenue and you think,
Yeah,
who can live near here? What do they do
yeah,
for a living?
yeah. I much prefer the sort of like Basque society, where it's just everyone is right, everyone's shoulder to shoulder at the bar. Really doesn't matter who you are, and you're all, you know, uh,
Exactly.
Maybe
participating
your
with
paint
everyone,
shows.
yeah, at the same, you know, everyone's got the same eye level to everyone else. Even like we were saying, Kirmi Uribe and Bernard Chaga, who are, who could really like, walk through the world with like, aren't I God's gift? But instead, they're right there with everyone else, just rubbing shoulders, laughing. Wonderful people, wonderful models for ways to be too.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So we are just about out of time, so I'd like to
Oh,
pass
look
it
at
over
that! Flew right by.
to Wor-Wic's president, Dr. Deb Casey, to see if she'd like to give some closing remarks.
Thank you so much, Julian, for sharing and reading. And I'd just like to say, David, this could be a great study abroad for us. So maybe we
Hmm.
need to chat some more with you about your study abroad.
Yeah, please do. It's I would love to help out to get students there. It's for me it's paradise on earth. It was the very first program that we had in the Honors College for study abroad. And it grew pretty quickly. So now I take three groups there, 3 weeks each. And really it could be more, but I kind of put a cap on it just that students will go to other programs because it really is I have a lot of students go back. I had a couple of students. Not that I'm promising this for your students, nor would they necessarily want it, but two students met on the program there, and then they went back like 10 years later, and one, and then he proposed to her there on the beach in the city where they met, and they just had their first kid. Um, no promises, but it happens.
Well, I really appreciated, this thought and thinking in today's world around fighting for one's home. And
Yeah,
I think threaded throughout the conversation that you had with us tonight, it resonated with me. And, in the face of violence and war, you still were able to tell that story of, the people, the memories of the survivors, and the culture of your ancestral lands. So I think that that's really important um, for our students to continue to think about themselves and what does that mean, fighting for one's home, whatever your political views are, or
yeah.
your cultural history is, it's still about, what does that mean for you as an individual? And then what does that mean for the community that surrounds you?
And I think what it means too is like not giving up, in
Mhm.
the end. Like
Mhm.
that's like when my novel was published a week after the 2024 election. Not a good time for a novel to come out. And my someone here in the building, I live in Boston, was like, "Oh, your book came out perfect time." And I was like, I don't, I don't, I don't know. I don't think so. Because like if I would have worked 12 years on a novel about a zombie apocalypse and it came out the week of a zombie apocalypse, I can't imagine the reader who's just like, I've survived another day of the zombie apocalypse. I'm gonna kick off my boots, pour a glass of wine, and crack open a book about a different zombie apocalypse. But what I think the book does have for people in these times is the people who fought for the republic had like the odds were stacked against them from the word go because the world's democracies had abandoned them. Meanwhile, the nationalists had the support of Nazi Germany and fascist Italy, and so it was kind of a foregone conclusion. But in the face of those odds, they refused to submit. They refused to surrender. They were determined to fight for their vision of the world. And we face pretty insurmountable odds, today, be it climate change or whatever, whatever you want to, fit something in. The odds are against us. We could give up. And if we did, we could be pretty certain how this ends. Or, like these characters here, we could maintain a sort of shatterproof, hope, and try to bring about, a vision for the world that we want. And I think that's good for the planet, but I think like too for our souls, like,
Mhm.
you know, we could go through our days numbed. We could go through our days allowing the day's headlines to really like sap the life from us, to drain us of purpose, because that's ultimately what they, I think they're kind of after. Or, we can remain resolute. We could remain hopeful. We could remain determined to carry, to be sure that that light that we're born with, that light within ourselves doesn't get extinguished. And so that's it. Like that fighting for your home. Yeah, the fight takes on all sorts of shapes. But I think what it is too is like a fight for that integral part of you. Like, what does it mean to be alive? To be sure that you're not, dead before you die. That they're able to go through your days, vitally present. And that too, I think, is what we're kind of fighting for these days.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry. I guess I could get carried away. Probably stepped on your closing
It's
remarks
been a
there. My
great dialogue. Not at
apologies.
all. Not at all.
Sure.
Not at all. This is about what you're bringing to us. So appreciate you very much.
And thank you so much for this opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. It was great to hear from you tonight. So thanks everyone for coming. We have one more presentation from Echoes and Visions this semester. So next week, Wednesday on the 8th, we have Pulitzer nominated poet Dorian Lux. Thank you all so much. I left a link in the survey and have a great rest of your evening. Thank you so much again, Julianne.
Thank you,
Milisker, thank
David.
you.
David,
Mhm.
I tried to fill out your survey. It doesn't work if you're not a Warwick employee or student, just so you know.
Oh, okay.
But thank you so